Hollywood hides its darkest secrets well, but for these stars, alcohol shattered the illusion. Drunken rages, public humiliations, and deaths so shocking, they're hard to imagine. These are the 50 shocking stories of the stars who couldn't escape the bottle. Number 50. Gig Young.
The winner is Gig Young.
Gig Young had everything: charm, talent, and an Oscar. But behind the scenes, his life was falling apart. In the 1950s, he started drinking heavily, and by the time he won an Academy Award in 1969 for They Shoot Horses, don't they? His addictions controlled him. He was taking 7 Valium pills a day and drinking so much that his body couldn't handle it. Things got so bad that he was fired from Blazing Saddles on his very first day after collapsing on set. His personal life wasn't any better. Gig was married 5 times, and most of his relationships were full of fights and heartbreak. His marriage to Elizabeth Montgomery was especially bad. His drinking often made him violent. By 1978, his career had hit rock bottom, and he was forced to take roles in small, low-budget movies like Game of Death. Even psychiatric help didn't save him, as the doctor he turned to was later discredited for unethical practices. The end came just 3 weeks after Gig married his 5th wife, Kim Schmidt. On October 19, 1978, he shot her and then himself in their apartment. Police found pills everywhere, a tragic symbol of his struggles. Even his will was bleak. He left his Oscar to his agent and only $10 to his daughter. A heartbreaking end to a man once so full of promise. Number 49. Oliver Reed.
I was known as a wild one by all the folks around.
Oliver Reed was known for his tough roles in movies and his wild drinking in real life. His drinking stories were legendary. He claimed he drank 1,000 pints of beer a week and was known to become uncontrollable after a few drinks. He once drank a 100-year-old bottle of wine from a host's family cellar, only to throw it up moments later. In 1999, while filming Gladiator in Malta, Oliver promised to stay sober. For months, he kept his word. But one night, sailors at a local bar challenged him to a drinking contest, and he couldn't resist. He drank pint after pint of beer, followed by rum and whiskey, all while arm wrestling the sailors. That night, his body gave out. Oliver collapsed during the contest and died from a heart attack on the way to the hospital. He was 61, and though his life had been larger than life, his death felt painfully avoidable. Number 48. Errol Flynn.
Thanks so, man.
Errol Flynn was famous for his charm and daring roles, but his real life was just as wild as his movies. By his 40s, his health was ruined from drinking and drugs. He suffered from liver damage, chronic pain, and malaria. Doctors warned him to slow down, but Flynn refused. In his final days in Vancouver in 1959, he was seen drinking heavily at local bars, ignoring all advice. He died suddenly at a friend's apartment after getting an injection for pain. The chaos didn't end there. His young companion, Beverly Adland, was devastated, and the coroner's report painted a grim picture. Flynn's body showed the damage of years of hard living, and even in death, he shocked people when doctors discovered genital warts so large they preserved them for medical study. He was only 50, but his body was said to be as worn out as a 75-year-old's. Number 47. Richard Harris.
So I used to sneak out on the balcony and so take a quick draft of cigarette, then get back in again. It was great, it was great.
Richard Harris was as famous for his drinking as for his acting. Once, he went out to buy milk and ended up flying to Ireland for 3 weeks after seeing a rugby match poster. When he finally came home, he knocked on the door and told his wife, "Why didn't you pay the ransom?" In the 1970s, he joined Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton to form a trio of legendary drinkers. Harris even created his own club, Alcoholics Unanimous, where members encouraged each other to drink instead of stop. He had moments of sobriety, but in the 1990s, he returned to drinking Guinness, saying he couldn't resist. Despite his wild lifestyle, Harris found late success. He landed the role of Dumbledore in the Harry Potter movies after his granddaughter threatened not to speak to him unless he took the job. Even in chaos, he found a way to make people smile, a fitting end to his unpredictable life. Number 46. Andre the Giant.
Anyway, you'll see what I mean when he comes out here. I think you're going to like meeting him. Ladies and gentlemen, Andre the Giant.
Andre the Giant wasn't just big in size. His drinking stories were legendary. Every day, he drank so much alcohol that it added up to 7,000 calories, not even counting food. One time, he drank 119 beers in 6 hours. That's about 1 beer every 3 minutes. Eventually, he passed out in a hotel hallway. Since his friends couldn't move someone his size, they just covered him with a piano cover and let him sleep. In Japan, Andre drank 16 bottles of plum wine during a 4-hour bus ride. After that, he went on to wrestle 3 matches, including a huge 20-man battle royal, without looking drunk at all. At another bar, when it was time for last call, he ordered 40 vodka tonics and drank them all, staying until 4 a.m. Andre's drinking wasn't just about fun. He used it to deal with the constant pain from his condition, acromegaly. Even doctors had to adjust his anesthesia during surgery because of how much alcohol his body was used to. When asked how much it took for him to feel drunk, he said 2 liters of vodka only made him feel warm. Number 45. Anthony Hopkins.
There isn't a day goes by that I don't think about her.
Anthony Hopkins almost ruined his career before it even started. In the 1960s, he was unreliable and often hungover during his theater days. He drank to hide his fears and insecurities, using alcohol to escape from reality. Things got so bad that in 1975, he realized he couldn't remember where he had been or what he had done the night before. That's when he decided to change. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous and found hope through spirituality. From that point on, he stayed sober and turned his life around. Now, Hopkins has been sober for 47 years. He looks back at his struggle and calls it a gift. He says the anger and energy he once put into drinking became the fuel for his acting. Number 44. William Holden. William Holden's life was full of risk and tragedy. He was known for doing crazy stunts while drunk, like hanging from 10-story windows. But his drinking got worse as time went on. Even his director, Billy Wilder, said Holden drank to keep himself together. In 1981, after drinking 8 to 10 drinks, Holden tripped over a rug in his apartment and hit his head on a nightstand. The impact was so hard that it dented the wall. He tried to stop the bleeding but never called for help. Just 10 minutes later, he passed out and bled to death, only a few steps from his phone. The saddest part? No one found him for a whole week. Friends had warned this might happen, and Holden himself once said he knew he'd die alone and without dignity. His death was a heartbreaking end to a life that could have been so much more. Number 43. Mary Aster. Mary Aster battled alcohol addiction for years. It began in the 1930s, but really took over her life in the late 1940s. Her career was struggling, and her drinking got worse. Between 1949 and 1951, she overdosed on sleeping pills 3 times. The last time, it became big news and forced her to face the truth. In 1949, she checked herself into a treatment center. 2 years later, she joined Alcoholics Anonymous and found strength in her new Catholic faith. A kind priest, who was also a psychologist, encouraged her to write about her life as part of her recovery. This gave her a way to heal and even brought her a new career. Aster became a writer, publishing books, and even an autobiography that told her story honestly. She stayed sober for the rest of her life and kept acting until the 1960s. Number 42. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's struggles began shockingly early. When she was just 10 years old, her mother gave her pills to keep her awake during the day and to help her sleep at night. Things got worse when Judy started working for MGM. The studio gave her drugs to control her weight and help her stay awake for long hours. By the time she starred in The Wizard of Oz at 17, she was already addicted. Her addiction only grew as she got older. Judy spent time in psychiatric hospitals and tried to take her own life more than once. In 1947, she used broken glass to cut her wrist. Later, during her marriage to Sid Luft, she attempted suicide several more times. Her behavior became unpredictable, and studios stopped trusting her. She was fired from movies like Annie Get Your Gun and The Barclays of Broadway. In 1959, doctors told her she was gravely ill with liver damage and might not live more than 5 years. But she kept performing even when she was visibly drunk on stage. Some audiences were so angry they threw food at her. Financial problems also followed her. She owed huge amounts in taxes and had to sing in small clubs just to survive. Judy's life ended tragically on June 22, 1969, when she accidentally overdosed on sleeping pills. She was only 47 years old. Number 41. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy's battle with alcohol ruled his life. During the filming of Marie Galante in 1934, he disappeared for 2 weeks. When they finally found him, he was passed out in his hotel room. The studio lost so much money that they sued him for delaying production. His drinking caused problems at home, too. One night at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Tracy had a fight with Katharine Hepburn and hit her. Other times, she had to sleep outside his room because he had locked her out during his drinking binges. Tracy also struggled with terrible insomnia. He used pills to sleep and stimulants to stay awake. On top of that, he felt deep guilt over his son's deafness, which he blamed on himself. This guilt only pushed him further into drinking. Although there were times when he tried to stop, Tracy never beat his addiction. He saw it as his personal failure, not a disease. Number 40. John Wayne. John Wayne's drinking was as big as his movie star image. He could drink enormous amounts without ever seeming drunk. One famous story tells how he brought 2 bottles of tequila into a bar, drank for hours, and ended up with a $1,000 tab, an incredible sum back then. Despite his reputation, people close to him said Wayne wasn't dependent on alcohol. He didn't drink while working and could go without it when he needed to. But when he did drink, he drank a lot. In one instance, he handled business meetings and entertained guests, all while finishing almost 2 bottles of tequila. Wayne's drinking became part of his larger-than-life legend, making him seem even more unstoppable. Number 39. Anne Margaret. Anne Margaret faced her own battles with addiction early in her career. Her manager took advantage of her, misusing her money and forcing her into bad movie deals. The stress pushed her toward alcohol, which soon began to take over her life. In her autobiography, she spoke openly about her struggles. She described how hard it was to recognize her addiction and how she faced setbacks on her path to recovery. But she didn't give up. Anne Margaret used her story to help others. She became an advocate for addiction awareness and used her platform to shine a light on the challenges performers face. Her courage and determination turned her darkest moments into a story of hope. Number 38. Orson Wells. Orson Wells was a brilliant filmmaker, but his struggles with alcohol became just as famous as his movies. In the late 1970s, he became the face of Paul Masson wine commercials, where he earned a fortune, $500,000 a year, about $2 million today. The ads had a catchy slogan, "We will sell no wine before it's time." But during one shoot, Wells showed up drunk. He slurred his words, stumbled at the table, and couldn't stick to the script. When someone asked him to compare the wine to a Stradivarius violin, Wells snapped back, "Come on, gentlemen! You've got a nice little cheap wine here. Don't compare it to a Stradivarius." Despite the chaos, the commercials worked. Paul Masson's wine sales went up by 30%. Even at his lowest, Wells's charm could still captivate an audience. Number 37. Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost had it all: fame, beauty, and a bright future in Hollywood. But everything fell apart when Warner Brothers dropped her in 1926, and shortly after, her mother died in a car accident. Heartbroken and out of work, she turned to alcohol and unhealthy eating. By 1935, she was barely surviving, taking whatever small film roles she could get. In 1937, Marie died alone in her apartment. Neighbors noticed her dog barking non-stop and called the police. Inside, they found Marie's body, empty liquor bottles, and a note promising to pay her friend Joan Crawford $110. Rumors later claimed her dog had eaten parts of her body, but this was a lie spread by a sensationalist writer. Joan Crawford paid for Marie's funeral, and stars like Clark Gable and Barbara Stanwyck came to say goodbye. At the time of her death, Marie had only $300 to her name, a tragic ending for a once promising star. Number 36. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was one of Hollywood's greatest actors, but his battle with alcohol destroyed his career. He started drinking at 14, and by the late 1930s, studios didn't want to work with him anymore. His drinking made him unreliable, and even on the set of Romeo and Juliet in 1936, he had to be sent to a rehab center. But rehab didn't stop him. He kept drinking, even sneaking alcohol on set. Fellow actor Basil Rathbone said it was heartbreaking to see such a talented man in such bad shape. By 1937, Barrymore was bankrupt, owing $160,000. His last film, Playmates, 1941, was a sad reflection of his life. He played an alcoholic actor, essentially mocking himself. In 1942, Barrymore collapsed while recording a radio performance. He passed away shortly after, marking the tragic end of a legendary actor whose talent couldn't save him from his addiction. Number 35. Larry Hagman. Larry Hagman was famous for playing the ruthless J.R. Ewing in Dallas, but off-screen, he battled his own demons. During the show, he drank up to 5 bottles of champagne every day. Years of heavy drinking led to liver damage, and in 1992, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. In 1995, he got a liver transplant, which saved his life. To honor his donor, he kept a photo of them by his mirror and said a prayer every morning. But old habits die hard. Larry kept drinking in secret until a second health scare in 2003 forced him to stop completely. In his autobiography, he called his battle with alcohol a 50-year fight. Larry passed away in 2012, surrounded by his loved ones. His life was a mix of excess, redemption, and reflection. Number 34. Dean Martin. Dean Martin made people believe he was always drunk, but it was all an act. On stage, he would walk in with a drink, joking that he had come straight from the bar. He made it look like he was sipping scotch, but his son later said it was usually just apple juice or watered-down soda. This funny, tipsy image wasn't just for laughs. It helped him cover up when he forgot lyrics or missed cues. People loved the act so much that even famous figures joked about it. One time, Senator Barry Goldwater said Dean toasted to both his health and an armadillo at the same party. In real life, Dean was very different. He liked quiet afternoons playing golf more than wild parties. In fact, if his house parties went on too long, he'd call the police on his own guests. His daughter said he was serious about being on time and doing his job well. For Dean, it was about giving his best performance, even if it looked like he was just goofing around. Number 33. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift's troubles began long before a terrible car accident in 1956. After leaving a dinner party hosted by Elizabeth Taylor, he crashed his car into a pole. The injuries were horrifying. His jaw, nose, and sinus were broken, and his face was deeply cut. Elizabeth Taylor saved his life by pulling teeth out of his throat so he could breathe. The accident left one side of his face stiff and changed his appearance forever. This made him feel worse about himself, and he turned to alcohol and pills to cope. People started calling his slow decline the longest suicide in Hollywood. Still, Clift tried to keep working. Just 2 months after the accident, he returned to finish filming Raintree County, but his health kept getting worse. By 1962, he had missed so much work on Freud that the studio sued him. He won the case, but his career was damaged. For years, no one wanted to hire him. Number 32. Richard Burton. Richard Burton was a smart man, but his battle with drinking ruined his life. In his personal diaries, he wrote honestly about how he felt. Just before he died, he joked about not feeling old yet, but he guessed he'd feel differently at 60. Sadly, he never made it to 60. He passed away at 58 because of a brain bleed caused by heavy drinking. Burton's drinking hurt not just his health, but also his relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. His diary showed how complicated their love was, full of fiery arguments and strange habits, like Taylor teasing him on purpose. When Burton wasn't drinking, he noticed how boring people could be, but those sober days never lasted long. In the end, alcohol took over his life. Number 31. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was one of the first celebrities to openly talk about addiction. In 1983, at age 51, she went to the Betty Ford Center to deal with her problems with alcohol and pills. Back then, no famous person had ever done something like this, and it changed how people saw addiction. Her struggles were serious. Over 5 years, she got thousands of pills from her doctors. Her son once saw her so drunk that she asked him to give her an injection. During her marriage to Senator John Warner, she said she became both a drunk and a junkie. Instead of hiding her recovery, Elizabeth talked about it publicly. She even went back to rehab in 1988 after a relapse, showing that recovery isn't always perfect. Her bravery inspired others, like Liza Minnelli and Michael Jackson, to get help. She once said, "The same determination that got her addicted helped her fight her way back to health." Number 30. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's life is one of Hollywood's saddest stories. In 1950, she was a star, earning $10,000 a week and acting alongside James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. But just 12 years later, she was on Sunset Boulevard, selling herself for $5. Losing custody of her son in 1956 broke her heart and sent her drinking out of control. She never saw him again. By her early 30s, Barbara didn't look like the glamorous star she once was. She had gained over 100 pounds. Her face was covered with broken veins, and her skin was constantly red from alcohol. Bartenders said you could smell the alcohol on her even before she ordered a drink. Between 1955 and 1963, she was arrested many times for shoplifting and prostitution. Police officers who found her said she was so drunk, she didn't even seem like the same person. At just 39 years old, she died alone, far from the star she used to be. Number 29. Broderick Crawford. Broderick Crawford's drinking was a constant problem, even while he starred in the TV show Highway Patrol in the 1950s. His drinking was so well known that the California Highway Patrol jokingly called him Old 502, their code for drunk driving. Crawford's problem was so bad that the show's crew had to film scenes in the morning because he would be too drunk later in the day. They even used tricks to hide his condition. Some scenes made it look like he was standing, but he was actually lying down, and the camera was tilted to make it look normal. The show's advisor, Officer Frank Runyon, was given one main job: keep Crawford sober. Even with all these efforts, his drinking strained relationships with the production team. His license was suspended, so they had to film some scenes on private roads. His drinking followed him into his later years, including a near-disastrous appearance on Saturday Night Live in 1977, which the cast called one of their hardest shows ever. Number 28. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was known for her beauty and talent, but her drinking became just as legendary. By the 1950s, she was drinking constantly and smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Her drinking led to wild affairs, public scandals, and even violence. She admitted that actor George C. Scott, another heavy drinker, would beat her during their fights. Ava's drinking also hurt her career. She refused to act unless she was drunk, forcing director John Huston to join her in drinking tequila just to get scenes done. Her behavior got her banned from some of Europe's best hotels. She once joked, "Yes, I'm beautiful, but morally, I stink." Her lifestyle left her with a chaotic reputation, but it also made her unforgettable. Number 27. Bernard Lee. Bernard Lee, famous for playing M in the James Bond films, battled his demons quietly. After losing his wife in a house fire in 1972 and being mugged by gang members, his drinking got worse. On set, producers locked him in his dressing room between takes, but he found a way to sneak alcohol through a straw in the keyhole. Richard Burton, a legendary drinker himself, admitted that Lee could outdrink him easily. Lee's co-workers often saw him show up with shopping bags full of alcohol. During one day of filming, he drank an entire crate of Guinness by breakfast and kept going with scotch for the rest of the day. Despite his struggles, he kept working as M until his health gave out. His determination to keep going, even as he struggled, made him a tragic but admired figure. Number 26. Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford lived a life full of drama, both on and off the screen. He had serious struggles with alcohol and a complicated love life that involved some of Hollywood's most famous stars. He had affairs with actresses like Rita Hayworth, Joan Crawford, Judy Garland, and Brigitte Bardot. His relationship with Rita Hayworth was especially shocking. While filming The Loves of Carmen in 1948, Hayworth became pregnant and secretly traveled to France for an abortion. Ford was obsessed with recording every detail of his life. He kept diaries from 1934 and even installed a secret system in his mansion that recorded calls with 143 lovers, including some surprising names like President Richard Nixon. But his drinking got worse over time. It nearly killed him and left him unable to walk for 10 years before his death in 2006. Ford was married 4 times. His first wife, Eleanor Powell, was described by their son as a saint. After their divorce, Ford married younger women who eventually spent much of his fortune. Though he was known to audiences as a relatable everyman, his private life was full of secrets. These stories were revealed by his son Peter, who backed them up with letters, diaries, and recordings. Number 25. Michael Landon. Michael Landon seemed perfect on TV, but behind the scenes, he had a hidden battle with alcohol. While playing Charles Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie, he drank vodka from a coffee mug on set. His young co-star, Melissa Gilbert, later shared how this affected her. She said Landon's drinking made her choose partners who reminded her of him, men who smelled like alcohol. What made Landon's drinking unusual was that he never seemed drunk. He stayed in control, but it still took a toll. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he admitted that years of drinking and smoking likely caused his illness. Despite his struggles, he faced the disease with courage. He even appeared on The Tonight Show to talk about it and clear up rumors. Landon passed away at 54. He left behind a legacy of incredible work, but his personal battles made his story both inspiring and heartbreaking. Number 24. Carrie Grant. Carrie Grant had it all: fame, money, and success. But inside, he struggled with depression and insecurities. In the late 1950s, he turned to an unusual therapy, LSD. Under a doctor's supervision, Grant took over 100 LSD sessions, hoping to find peace. During these sessions, he would lie on a couch, take the drug, and record his thoughts on tape. In 1962, he had done 72 sessions and said they changed his life. Grant felt happier and said the therapy healed emotional wounds that regular therapy couldn't touch. He became such a believer in LSD therapy that he spoke about it publicly, breaking taboos. Grant even left $10,000 in his will to the doctor who treated him, showing how much the therapy meant to him. Number 23. Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw's drinking was as famous as his acting. On the set of Jaws, it caused plenty of problems and some unforgettable moments. For one key scene, the famous USS Indianapolis speech, Shaw convinced director Steven Spielberg to let him drink before filming. It didn't go well. He got so drunk that the shoot had to stop. and Shaw called Spielberg later, begging to reshoot the scene sober. Shaw's drinking came from a lot of pain. His father died by suicide when he was only 12, leaving scars that never fully healed. Shaw admitted he couldn't face Hollywood life without alcohol, once saying, "How can you take it seriously without a drink?" His personal life was just as chaotic. His second wife, Mary Ure, also struggled with alcohol, and their marriage was full of jealousy and fights. Despite all this, Shaw was a respected actor, known for his raw talent. But his drinking often led to trouble, like the time he nearly got into a fight with a producer over a lost ping-pong match. Number 22. Carrie Fischer. Carrie Fisher's battle with addiction started when she was just a teenager. By the time she was 24, she was addicted to Percodan, an opioid she took every day. She wasn't taking it to feel good anymore. It was just to keep going. She called it punching in for work, as if addiction had become part of her daily routine. Things got so bad that by age 28, she ended up in the hospital. She was unconscious, and doctors had to pump her stomach because she couldn't even tell them what she had taken. Carrie used opioids to calm the manic episodes caused by her bipolar disorder. She said it helped her show a smaller, simpler version of her emotions, instead of letting them overwhelm her. Even after her death in 2016, a report found that drugs like cocaine, heroin, and alcohol were in her system. Despite all this, Carrie was open about her struggles. She even shared wild stories, like how Dan Aykroyd once saved her life by performing the Heimlich maneuver when she choked on a Brussels sprout while drunk. Number 21. Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy, the man behind Mr. Spock's cool and logical character on Star Trek, had his own very human struggle. During the show's second season, he started drinking to relax after long filming days. At first, it was just a couple of glasses of wine, but over time, it became a habit he couldn't control. His weekends were the worst. By late morning, he'd start drinking beer. By afternoon, he'd switch to stronger alcohol. By evening, he was often passed out. Sometimes, he'd even miss parties in his own home because of his drinking. Leonard knew it was a problem, but every promise he made to cut back ended in failure. His son, Adam, later shared that Leonard was a high-functioning alcoholic. He managed to work and provide for his family, but he struggled to connect emotionally. Recovery programs eventually helped both father and son rebuild their relationship. Number 20. Drew Barrymore. Drew Barrymore's story of addiction is heartbreaking. She started smoking at 9, drinking at 11, and by 13, she was using cocaine. At just 14, her life hit rock bottom when she tried to take her own life. After that, she went to rehab several times before turning 16. Her troubled relationship with her mother, Jade, made things worse. Drew later said she didn't really want to die. She just wanted to escape her mom's control. At 15, Drew took a big step. She became legally emancipated, meaning she could live on her own as an adult. This was the start of her recovery. She surrounded herself with positive friends and avoided the wild party scene that had dragged her down. Although she stayed sober for many years, she had a setback in 2016 after her divorce. But Drew fought hard and overcame it again. Today, she says recovery isn't just one decision, it's a way of life. Number 19. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was a Hollywood icon, always polished and glamorous, but behind closed doors, she struggled with alcohol. She would serve her guests enormous glasses of straight vodka, watching them closely to make sure they drank. Many guests secretly poured their drinks into plants or sinks to avoid drinking so much. Joan's alcoholism also affected her children. Her daughter Christina wrote in Mommy Dearest that Joan would wake her kids in the middle of the night and force them to clean for hours. These night raids were fueled by her drinking and obsession with control. Joan's need for perfection extended to everything: her appearance, her home, and even her relationships. She once said, "The most important thing a woman can have, next to talent, is her hairdresser." But her perfect image hid deep struggles. Number 18. Dennis Price. Dennis Price seemed to have it all. He came from a rich family and became famous for his role in Kind Hearts and Coronets, 1949. But behind the glamour, he was battling a serious alcohol addiction. His drinking was extreme. Every morning, he drank a whole crate of Guinness before the sun came up, and during work, he kept a steady flow of scotch. He didn't hide his problem. He would walk onto film sets carrying shopping bags full of alcohol. One shocking event showed just how bad things were. During a 6-hour binge, he drank 119 bottles of beer. He collapsed in a hotel hallway, and instead of helping him, his drinking buddies threw a tarp over him and left. His addiction also affected his acting. He showed up during the wrong parts of plays, and his once charming appearance began to fade. In 1954, his struggles pushed him to try taking his own life. He stuck his head in an oven, but a cleaning woman found him just in time to save him. Even after this, Price couldn't stop drinking. His addiction eventually killed him, as he died from liver failure after years of self-destruction. Number 17, Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi, famous for playing Dracula, started using morphine in 1935 to treat pain in his leg. Over time, he became addicted, and heavy drinking made things worse. By 1955, his health was in terrible shape. At 72 years old, he weighed just 125 pounds, looking like a shadow of the man he once was. In a bold move for the time, Lugosi publicly admitted to his addiction in court. He told the judge about smuggling methadone from England and how drugs had ruined his life, even stopping him from eating. He later checked into a hospital and spent 3 months in treatment. It worked. He got clean and became one of the first celebrities to talk openly about addiction and recovery. At a time when addiction was considered shameful, Lugosi's honesty was rare and inspiring. His son later said his father's courage in sharing his struggles was truly admirable. Number 16, Lon Cheney Jr. Lon Cheney Jr. will always be remembered as the Wolfman, but his life wasn't as magical as his movies. After his career at Universal Studios started to fall apart, his drinking got worse. It became so bad that it affected everything in his life. He acted out in strange ways and once even tried to end his own life. His drinking didn't just hurt his health, it also made it harder for him to get different roles. People only saw him as the werewolf, and this typecasting crushed his spirit. Kurt Siodmak, a writer from that time, later said Cheney's drinking was the main reason for his death. Even though he was talented, Cheney's drinking kept pulling him into a sad cycle of failure and regret. He couldn't escape it, and it left a tragic mark on his life and career. Number 15, Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum was a huge Hollywood star, but his drinking caused trouble everywhere he went. During the filming of His Kind of Woman, 1951, Mitchum got drunk while filming a fight scene. Instead of following the plan, he started hitting the stuntmen for real. The director, Richard Fleischer, tried to stop him, but Mitchum completely lost it. He destroyed the entire set in a drunken rage. The next day, when he was sober, he felt terrible and apologized to everyone. Even though his drinking caused delays and problems, Mitchum's charm and talent kept him a top star. Somehow, his wild behavior didn't stop him from being one of the most famous actors of his time. Number 14, Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd's life was shaped by heartbreak from an early age. In 1937, he witnessed something no child should ever see: his mother taking her own life. She drank poison, and Alan was there to see her suffer and die. This moment haunted him forever. By the 1950s, he was using alcohol, sleeping pills, and sedatives to deal with the pain and his constant insomnia. It became a dangerous habit he couldn't escape. In 1962, things got worse. Alan was found unconscious in his home with a gunshot wound in his chest, lying in a pool of blood. He claimed he heard a prowler and accidentally shot himself, but many people didn't believe him. Rumors spread that it was a failed suicide attempt. His struggles with addiction only deepened. In 1964, Alan injured his knee, forcing him to stay in bed for long periods. the isolation made his situation worse. On January 29, 1964, at just 50 years old, Allen was found dead in his Palm Springs home. The cause was a deadly mix of alcohol, barbiturates, and tranquilizers. It was a tragic end to a man who fought pain his entire life. Number 13, Paul Lynde. Paul Lynde was loved for his humor, but behind the jokes, his life was filled with pain. In 1965, he started drinking heavily with a friend named James Bing Davidson. His addiction grew quickly, especially after his TV show, The Paul Lynde Show, was canceled. Alcohol became his escape, but it also caused chaos. One of the darkest moments in Paul's life happened in July 1965. After a long night of drinking at a San Francisco hotel, his friend Bing accidentally fell out of their hotel window and died. The tragedy devastated Paul and pushed him deeper into drinking. By the 1970s, Paul's behavior had become unpredictable. In 1977, while serving as Grand Marshal at a college homecoming, he insulted a professor with racist remarks while drunk. The following year, he was arrested in Salt Lake City for interfering with police after his car was broken into. Friends said alcohol turned him into someone cruel, mocking even those closest to him. Paul's drinking ruined relationships and tainted the legacy of a man once loved for his wit. Number 12, Talula Bankhead. Talula Bankhead was a star with a personality larger than life. She was famous for her boldness and wild habits. Talula smoked up to 120 cigarettes a day and openly used cocaine, often joking, "Cocaine isn't habit-forming, and I know because I've been taking it for years." But behind her humor, her health was falling apart. By the 1950s, her heavy smoking made it hard for her to breathe, forcing long breaks during filming. Her home became a non-stop party spot, filled with drugs, alcohol, and even exotic pets. Over time, her habits became dangerous. Once, she accidentally set her dog on fire while smoking in bed. Her friends had to tape her arms down to stop her from taking too many pills. In her later years, Talula relied on alcohol, cocaine, and barbiturates to get through the day. Despite her fame, she spent her final years battling addiction and the damage it caused. Number 10, Clara Bo. Clara Bo's troubles began long before her Hollywood fame. In 1922, as a young girl, she experienced a horrifying moment when her mentally ill mother tried to kill her with a butcher knife while she slept. Clara survived, but the trauma stayed with her for life. Hollywood brought Clara fame, but it also brought pressure. By 1929, people noticed bottles of sedatives by her bed. She started drinking heavily and acting unpredictably. In 1930, her assistant, Daisy DeVoe, tried to blackmail her. The trial that followed exposed shocking stories about Clara's personal life, damaging her reputation. In the 1940s, Clara's mental health worsened. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and underwent painful shock therapy treatments. By the 1950s, she had withdrawn completely from public life, living alone in a small house. Clara died in 1965 from a heart attack, her once bright star dimmed by years of pain and isolation. Number 9, Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart loved alcohol, and it became a big part of his life. Every day, at exactly noon, he started drinking. He'd begin with scotch, drink 2 beers during lunch, and finish with a sweet drambuie. After that, he'd head to the Brown Derby to plan the rest of his night's drinking. Even on movie sets, Bogart kept his drinking under control until the cameras stopped rolling. As soon as filming ended, he'd shout, "Scotch!" and his hairdresser, who knew the routine, would bring drinks for him and his friends. His most famous drinking story happened while filming The African Queen. Most of the crew got sick with dysentery, but Bogart's heavy drinking kept him safe. His marriage to actress Mayo Method was chaotic. The pair were so wild when drunk that people called them the Battling Bogarts. In one fight, Mayo even shot at him. Bogart, unfazed, poured another drink and called his publicist. instead of the police. Despite drinking so much, Bogart was always professional. He showed up to work even with terrible hangovers and delivered flawless performances. Sadly, his drinking caught up with him. It led to esophageal cancer, and he passed away in 1957 at just 57 years old. Number 8. W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields made drinking his signature. At his peak, he drank 2 quarts of liquor every day. His day started with bourbon, continued with more through the afternoon, and ended with several martinis. Oddly enough, Fields didn't start drinking until his mid-30s because his juggling career required steady hands. Once he began, though, he couldn't stop. On movie sets, everyone knew about his drinking. Directors let him show up late, drink on the job, and leave early when he'd had enough. One time, he put gin in a baby's milk bottle during a shoot, stopping production until the baby sobered up. Yet, no one ever saw him drunk or out of control. Eventually, his drinking became a problem. Studios stopped giving him big roles, and his health suffered badly. He even developed a condition called W.C. Fields syndrome, caused by heavy drinking. Although he managed a year of sobriety, he returned to drinking and died in 1946 from a gastric hemorrhage on Christmas Day. Number 7. Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden's battle with alcohol was deeply personal. While filming The Long Goodbye, he was often drunk, but it fit his role as an alcoholic. By 1983, his life had fallen apart. He was living on a broken-down barge in France, far from the success of his Hollywood career. Hayden appeared in major films like The Godfather, but his drinking often got in the way. He was so nervous about acting that he'd drink before scenes to calm down. During one tough shoot with Stanley Kubrick, he was sweating and struggling until a few drinks steadied his nerves. What made Hayden different was his honesty. He admitted he was a violent, abusive drunk and talked openly about his addiction. Despite trying to quit many times, he couldn't escape alcohol's grip. He struggled with it until his death in 1986. Number 6. Gail Russell. Gail Russell's drinking began early. As a teenager, she used alcohol to deal with stage fright. By 19, she was secretly drinking vodka on set, hiding bottles in her dressing room. Her troubles became public in 1953 when she was named in John Wayne's divorce case. That same year, she was arrested for drunk driving. Her most shocking incident came in 1957. She crashed her car into a coffee shop, injuring a janitor. When the judge asked how much she drank, she replied, "Maybe 2, maybe 4, I don't know how many." After missing a court date, she was found unconscious at home and hospitalized for 3 months due to alcohol poisoning. Despite joining AA and trying to get better, Russell couldn't stay sober. She spent her final years alone in a small home, drinking heavily. In 1961, at just 36, she was found dead, surrounded by empty vodka bottles. A neighbor later said she truly wanted to stop drinking, but just couldn't. Number 5. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra loved Jack Daniel's whiskey so much that it became part of his image. For most of his life, he drank nearly a bottle of it every day. He had a ritual for drinking it. 2 fingers of whiskey in a glass with 3 or 4 ice cubes, no water, ever. He joked that water wasn't for drinking because, as he said, fish fuck in it. His drinking often got him into trouble. On one trip to the Far East, he got so angry during a hotel argument that he threw a phone at a window. The phone bounced back and hit him in the face. Sinatra even had a group of drinking buddies, including William Holden, Robert Mitchum, and John Wayne, called the American Olympic Drinking Team. If anyone in the group couldn't keep up with their drinking, they'd pull pranks like setting off fireworks outside their room or dragging them back to the bar. But Sinatra's drinking wasn't all fun. His wife, Barbara, noticed that when he drank gin, he became scary. She would lock herself in her room whenever he reached for the gin bottle. By 1994, his drinking caught up with him. During a show in Richmond, Virginia, he collapsed on stage after drinking 6 double Jack Daniels with dinner. Even though Sinatra was a perfectionist in his music, he stopped drinking and smoking before recording sessions. His addiction led to fights, broken TVs, and violent outbursts. Number 4. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was one of Hollywood's brightest stars, but behind the glamour, she struggled with alcohol. By her late 30s, her heavy drinking had already started to affect her beauty and career. During the 1960s, things got worse. She had trouble remembering her lines, and her performances began to suffer. In 1976, her health reached a breaking point. She was taken to a hospital, where doctors thought her problems were caused entirely by drinking. But that wasn't the full story. She was also suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's disease, though no one realized it at the time. The combination of her drinking and the disease made her condition much worse. Her daughter, Yasmin, stepped in to help. She moved her mother to the East Coast and made her quit drinking. Finally, in 1980, nearly 20 years after her first symptoms, doctors discovered she had Alzheimer's. For years, people had blamed her problems on alcohol, but something much more serious had been destroying her mind. Adding to her pain, it later came out that Hayworth had been sexually abused by her father as a child. That trauma likely contributed to her struggles with alcohol throughout her life. Number 3. Robin Williams. Robin Williams was a comedy legend, but he battled addiction for much of his life. His problems started during the 1970s, when he became famous on Mork and Mindy. He used cocaine and alcohol heavily during this time. In 1982, his friend John Belushi died from an overdose, just hours after Williams had seen him. This tragedy scared Williams so much that he quit drugs and alcohol for the next 20 years. In 2003, Williams relapsed while working on a movie in Alaska. The isolation and stress caused him to start drinking again, though he stayed away from cocaine, saying, "I knew that would kill me." This relapse hurt his personal life and played a role in the end of his second marriage in 2008. Williams spent the last years of his life trying to fight his addictions. He went to rehab several times, but something else was going on. After his death in 2014, doctors found he had Lewy body dementia, a severe brain condition that had been mistaken for Parkinson's disease. This disorder caused depression, confusion, and fear, making his final years incredibly hard and leading to his tragic end. Number 2. Albert Finney. Albert Finney's drinking wasn't just a habit. It was part of his life in the theater world during the 1960s and 70s. At the Royal National Theatre, he had a routine. He would drink 3 or 4 pints of Guinness at lunch and then sip scotch during evening performances. He was so famous for it that he'd often show up to work carrying booze in shopping bags. Sometimes the drinking got the better of him. He even performed the wrong acts during plays because he was too drunk to keep track. One night, during a performance of Hamlet, Finney walked on stage during the first act, but instead of the right lines, he performed Hamlet's death monologue from the last act. The audience was shocked, sitting in silence, while the rest of the cast tried to fix the scene. Finney's drinking wasn't subtle. His co-stars remembered him starting his day with a crate of Guinness for breakfast and finishing it off with more drinks by night. Everything changed in 1984 when doctors told him he had kidney cancer. It was a turning point. The diagnosis made him face the damage his drinking had done. After treatment, he gave up alcohol for good. But the years of heavy drinking had already changed him, making him look older and less sharp. Even so, Finney's talent and determination remained a big part of who he was. Number 1. Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole's love for alcohol was larger than life. While filming Lawrence of Arabia, he and his co-star Omar Sharif often escaped to Beirut. There, they would drink for days on end before returning to set. His wild behavior didn't stop there. On The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, O'Toole showed up so drunk he broke his glasses, cursed, and ran off stage after just 2 minutes. By the 1970s, doctors warned him another drink could kill him, but even then, he couldn't stop. While working on The Ruling Class in 1972, the studio had to build him a private bar on set because he kept sneaking off to drink whiskey at a racetrack instead of preparing for his scenes. His drinking also hurt his family life. When he visited his sick daughter in the hospital, she didn't even recognize him. She turned to her mother and asked, "Who is that nice man?" The stories about O'Toole's drinking are endless. During the filming of Beckett in 1964, he was reportedly drunk for the entire production. Another time, he went to see a play in Soho with a date, only to realize halfway through that he was supposed to be in the play himself. Eventually, O'Toole had to quit drinking because of his health. Even after he switched to lemonade, he still spent his time in pubs. He didn't like being around sober people, so he stuck to the lively drinking culture he loved.